Hello, it's Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher. In this video, we're going to cover quite a few things in preparation for making our gloves. We're going to be looking at how you lay your pattern pieces out on your leather, how you look at and mark your leather to mark your pattern pieces on, and then also how to cut out your pattern pieces so they don't end up stretching.
Now we've created our paper pattern pieces, the next thing to do is to start laying them out on the leather and working out where we're going to cut things out from. When we work with gloving leather, we want the stretch to go across our hand so that as we put the glove on, the leather will expand to fit and to encase our hand. We don't want the stretch going along the fingers because that will mean that the leather will actually stretch and sort of elongate, and we won't get as good a fit going across the hand. The same applies when we're looking at the fourchette and the thumb piece. So with the fourchette, we want the stretch to go again around the finger. So as the fourchette sits down the side of the finger, we want to make sure that the stretch is going across the finger in order to get a really good fit. And with the thumb piece, we want the stretch to go across and around the thumb so that again we get a really good fit and we're not going to end up with a sort of very stretched, odd looking finger. When you're looking at the leather, and we're going to show you a sort of slightly bigger picture of this in just a moment, the leather will have an obvious stretch one way and not the other. So if I just pull this, you can see that it's wrinkling and it's really quite springy. If I then go and pull it the other way, it does have a little bit of give, but not as much. I'll be laying my pattern pieces out to work with the stretch, so I'll have the stretch going from left to right, and I'll have that going the same direction on my pattern pieces as well. And I think we can just about see that I've drawn that in there. You can see stretch with that double-headed arrow, and that's just there as a little guide to make sure that we work with the stretch rather than against it. So if I've got my leather in the correct position, it should be more springy as we pull it from left to right than it would be if we go from top to tail. So let's just have a quick check. So as I pull from here, yeah, we can see that there's quite a nice lot of stretch there. If I then pull from top to bottom, there's a little bit of give, but it's nowhere near as springy or as stretchy. So I know that when I lay my pattern pieces out, I need to make sure that my stretch line is going from left to right. Before we start placing our pattern pieces, we just want to do a quick check of the leather to check for any holes, check for any skin flaws or imperfections. When I make my sort of final pair of gloves, I want to make sure that I'm using the best parts of the leather, and when I'm making my mock-up, I can use the sort of bits that perhaps aren't as nice or aren't as good a quality. So as you're looking at the leather, the pieces that are on the left and the right hand side are going to be the pieces that perhaps would have wrapped around the animal's belly a little bit more. So you might find those a bit sort of softer, a bit sort of squishier, and maybe they've sort of wrinkled a bit, and maybe they perhaps won't be what you want to use on your final gloves. Having a look at the skin, you'll probably see that there'll be some imperfections, some flaws, but have a good look around. Check the back, check the front. As I was looking at this piece earlier, I found that there are some marks on the underside of the leather, and you can just see those there, and there where there are marks there, I think they're almost like scars, because although there's not necessarily anything, well, there's one mark there which you can just about see, so they are scars perhaps from a previous injury. So I might avoid those, or perhaps use those areas in my mock-up, saving the nicer areas for the actual sort of gloves proper. So once we have worked out where all our good bits are, we're then going to lay on our pattern pieces. When you start to lay out your pattern pieces, you want them to be fairly close together. You just need enough room to be able to get your scissors through the gap between the pattern pieces. You don't need a massive amount of space. The key thing with the gloves is to remember that we are going to need to reverse some of the pattern pieces. So as I've laid mine out here, I've got my stretch going from left to right on all of my pieces. I'm going to be drawing around them in just a moment, and I'll show you what that looks like. And as I do the right side first, I'll then need to turn the pattern pieces over so that we then cut out a left thumb and a left trank. With the fourchette pieces, we're going to need 12 of these, and we'll be cutting 6 of them looking in this particular direction, and then we will turn them over and we will cut another 6 going the opposite way, and that then gives us the inside and the sort of the left and right of the fingers that we've got there. So I've laid my pattern pieces on to the bottom end of the leather that I'm going to be cutting my mock-up pair out of. I find it quite useful to use something like a pattern weight or a tin of baked beans or something just to hold down the pattern pieces whilst I start drawing. I'm going to be doing the right side first, and I'm going to draw one of the thumb and one of the trank, and then I'm going to do my fourchettes. But let's just start with the trank first. So I've weighted everything down. I find it quite useful to use something like a gel pen or a silver pen for writing onto leather, or even sometimes a biro can be quite useful. I'm using a black leather because I want that to show up on camera nice and easily. So I'm going to use a silver gel pen to draw on. I have just very quickly checked just in the corner to see that it does show up, and now what I'm going to do is to go all the way around my trank, all the way around my thumb hole, and I'm going to mark in the holes at the base of the finger. So you want to get a really good shape, you want to get a really good line. Sometimes you've got to just go over a little bit more. Keep the pen upright so that you're not angling it to cut in or to sort of undercut or to overcut, and it's just enough so that you can see it. You don't have to saturate the leather. I quite like a gel pen because I can easily wipe anything off if there is an error, but it's also really important to just make sure that as you go round you do actually cover every bit of your pattern. Sometimes you just got to slide the weights out of the way in order to do that, and then we just keep going all the way around. Now before I finish the trank, I just want to have a little check, and I'm going to just do some circles at the base of the fingers where those marks are to make sure they are transferred. Before I take the pattern piece away, I can just have a bit of a cheeky lift up, and I can see that I've got my pattern piece all drawn out. Before I move it, I'm going to repeat and do exactly the same on the thumb. Again, keeping a nice upright pen, I'm going to draw all the way around. Make sure that I'm nice and accurate and close to the template, and again I'm going to just mark the circles and where we pierce the holes before I sort of cut out or remove anything. So I've got that one done, and I can just do a cheeky little lift up so I can see, and you can see just about, that I've actually got my shape there, and I'm really happy with that. I'm now going to do the fourchettes, and I'm probably going to get 2 in here, and then I might look to take the rest from over to the left here. And what we're now going to do is cut everything out. The first thing I'm going to do is to do a rough cut, so I'm just going to very carefully cut out along close to my drawn on lines, so that I can then come back in and get a really nice close cut to the leather without the rest of the excess there and that getting in the way of my cutting. Once you've finished your rough cutting, you are then going to come back in and cut a really nice crisp edge around the outline of your leather. So what we are going to do is cut out and cut around each of the fingertips, down the sides and across the bottom. We are not going to cut down the fingers until we start sewing them. Now some people find it's helpful to have the excess on the right as you are cutting. Some people find that it's helpful to have the excess on the left when you're cutting. Whichever way works for you, do that particular way. What we're looking for is a really nice, clean, straight cut along the edge of the leather. We don't want it to look uneven. We don't want any sort of bits that are looking like you've closed the blade of the scissors and it's bumped along. So if you have a look at my bits here, you can see that this bit is slightly uneven, and it's just where I've closed the blade of the scissor before moving it along. So we don't want any little bits like that. We actually want it to be nice and smooth. I'm using quite a large pair of scissors that I keep just for gloving, and I want to get a nice clean cut with my blade. So I'm going to start off with my excess on the right so that you can see what I'm doing, and I'm basically cutting along my line. So before the blade completely closes, I'm going to move it along just very gently, and this is where, don't rush. If you've had a stressful day, don't cut out your gloves on a stressful day. Make sure you're feeling nice and calm, work your way along, and before you completely close the blade of the scissors, move them along to the next part of the line. So I've just lifted mine up slightly so I can work around the camera to show you. So we want a really good line, and of course sometimes if you get little bits like that, you can just straighten the edge off and get rid of those. As far as possible, try and keep the leather on the table when you are cutting, just because it helps to make life a bit easier. And remember to keep the blade of the scissors upright. Don't be tempted to angle and sort of cut, and because that'll just give you a false sense of where you're at. Larger offcuts are really useful to practice stitching on, so I've got a pile of those next to my my pile of thumb pieces and my fourchettes. So the next thing is to go around, cut everything out, and then we will come back and do the thumbs. As well as marking the points for the fingers, we also want to make sure that we have marked points C to D on our pattern pieces. So we drew round earlier, we drew round the shape of the thumb, that sort of lower part of the diamond. To get that point C to D, you just need to lift that up like a little flap, and you're going to just go from C to D, but you're not going to join it up from D to A. So in effect it's A, B, C and D, and there should be no line under that D to A section there, which if I just lift that off to show you, so we can see there's nothing there, but you've got the other lines in place. We want to then repeat that on the left hand side as well. And of course everything is reversed on the left. So we have drawn our thumb hole in. We just need to then lift up the flap to draw the line C to D, but not A to D. So if I lift that off and just show you, we've now got our completed thumb shape. So everywhere here where we have a silver line, when we get to it, we will be cutting along those lines. When it comes to cutting out the fingertips, I do find that my big leather shears, although they're brilliant, sometimes they can be a bit too big to go round the curves of the finger. What I have got is a pair of old embroidery scissors that I've just sort of added a bit of ribbon to, and I find that with these I can get a much better shape if I'm struggling a little bit with the larger scissors. So just a little tip there is to have a pair of smaller scissors when you're cutting your leather. They can also help when you're sewing your leather as well, in case you need to trim any uneven bits off as you go. So we've just finished the main cutting out of the gloves, and we're now just going to do a little bit of tidying up before we cut out the thumb pieces. So on the back of one of my thumb pieces, I can see that the leather is just a little bit hairy, and if I turn it over I can see that it's kind of hanging out over the what would be the seam. So with my small embroidery scissors that I use for leather, I can just come along and just give that a little bit of a quick haircut so that we can stop any of these sort of particularly fluffy pieces poking out through our seam. So you can just give that a little bit of a trim. The next thing I'm going to do, and I'm using a baby wipe to help with this, is just to dab off the silver pen from around the edges of where we've cut. I'm not going to dab where we've marked the base of the fingers on the trank, and neither am I going to take off the where the thumb is, because we don't want to lose that. And I'm not going to do anything with the dots on the thumb pieces either. We want those in place. So all I'm going to do, and I'm not wiping across the whole piece, I am literally just coming along the edge quite quickly, dabbing all the way around just to get rid of the silver pen on the actual pieces of the glove. So we just go all the way around. It's very quick, and if you're not sure that the colour fastness of the leather may be affected by using the wipe, test whatever it is you're going to use. You could just use a dampened piece of kitchen roll, but test it on a piece of leather that isn't going to be used, and then if there's an issue, you know, without ruining the leather that you're working with. So I've done that one. I'm now going to repeat for the other side of the trank, the thumb pieces and all of the fourchettes. Once we've just dabbed off the rest of the silver pen, just quickly double check that you've got all of your points in, your sort of base of your fingers in, and then we're now going to cut out the thumb section. Everywhere in this particular part where there is a silver line is where we are going to be cutting. To get us access to that, I'm going to just fold a little bit of the trank so that I can cut into what would be the bit that we're going to remove nice and safely, and then I can insert my scissors, and I'm using my little leather scissors for this just because it gives me a little bit more control on the curve. So once I've cut in, I'm just going to extend that initial cut a little bit to enable me to get nice and close into the shape following my line, and being really careful at the corners not to overcut. You know, it's better to come back and cut in a second time than it is to actually lose the nice shape that you've got there. So once we've opened that up, of course, then it's just a question of following the line and cutting everything else out. Again, at where your lines change direction, just take a little bit of care to make sure that you don't overcut and extend the line beyond where you want it to go. And the last one I'm going to cut now is the sort of the round shape for the hole. So I'm not going to sort of start right up here because it means coming out of a corner. So I'm just going to turn the leather around, and I'm going to cut towards the line but not go to the line. And then I'm going to cut up and sort of taper my cut line into the line that I want to be cutting out on. And I find that just gives me a good run into the corner without compromising the shape. So now I can come back round and I can pick up my line, and I can then easily, so I'm trying to cut sort of on the line. Sometimes you might find it easier to have your scissors coming from sort of the outside on top down. Sometimes you might find it easier to have the blade on the inside coming to the outside. That's going to be a personal sort of thing, whichever method you do, make sure you don't cut off anything you need, because that'll be really frustrating. So I'm just now going to pick up the taper that goes around for the rest of the thumb piece, and I'm going to very carefully follow my line and keep that nice round curve. So everything is now cut out, ready to start sewing. I like to keep my paper patterns and my card patterns handy so that I can check things while sewing. I would advise to always make sure that you know where your fourchettes are, and it might be worth just having a little bag for the project to sit in. This is also a really good time to just have a final kind of eyeball of your edges, make sure that you're happy with anything, and if you're not happy, and using probably your little scissors or your big scissors, whichever feels easier in the hand, you may just wish to even up any edges to avoid any sort of issues later on when you're putting the gloves together. So have a quick check, make sure you've got all your key marks in, and then it's on to choosing the colour of thread.